I recently picked up this Marder 1. It's one of Tamiya's newer kits and comes with two really nice figures, but I've always wondered if an expensive resin figure was really worth the money. This one from Alpine is almost as much as the entire Tamiya kit. Is it worth it? Let's find out. For good measure, I decided to include this Academy figure from the 80s in my research. I'm going to paint him up just like I paint up the other ones. Coming in at only 3 parts, he's a far cry from the Tamiya kit, which now boasts quite a few. After cleaning them up, I decided to try and enhance some of the details around the belt here where the seam line meets it, to try and accentuate some more of the shadows when we get to the painting stage. I don't know if this really helped, but I don't think it hurt either. After gluing them up, it's time to inspect the resin figure. Fewer parts, cast in some more solid pieces. You can see the comparison here. Obviously, what comes to mind is all the details on the front of the resin figure. I was pretty excited about these folds here, but during the painting process, they aren't really as good as the resin one. There's just a little bit less detail, and everything's a little bit more rounded over, a little softer. You can see how sharp all the folds are in the resin figure as compared to the fewer and softer in the Tamiya kit. Again, beautifully detailed arms, and it comes with 2 heads to choose from. After a quick cleanup, it's far less work. It was time to inspect all the figures with all the head options that I had laid out. Then it was time to get everything ready for painting. I wanted to paint the heads separately, so I had to mount those and get them out of the way. Primed everything black, and then hit everything with a zenithal highlight from above. I tried to use the brightest white I had, and I sprayed at about a 40-degree angle to get all of those nooks and crannies to really pop. Next up, it was time to prep the wet palette. This is how I do it. I just make sure that everything is wet, but not too wet, and then it is ready to paint. I want to thank CW Modeling and everyone else who commented on my last figure painting video where I had a really hard time with glazing. Everyone's suggestions were great, but the one that really worked the most was that I had too much paint on my brush still, and everything was too wet. And that was really the key to where I was falling short with the glazing technique. So you can see here, I'm just using really light coats, but I unload the brush on the palette until there's almost no paint left. So we're just getting thin coats of just the pigment, and it's not pooling anywhere. And that's really helping preserve those shadows underneath. I still wanted to make sure that the highlights were all painted, so I went over all the little sewing lines and buttons that are just available on this figure. It really is amazing when you start painting it, you see even more of the detail that the other figures are lacking. And I think it's just the process of making the resin figures versus the plastic figures gives the resin the opportunity to just have more detail. Things like the buckles on the belt, little details imprinted in it, it all builds to make these resin figures that much more detailed. Even the metals on his jacket are all depicted and all sculpted beautifully in this figure. You can see the highlights on his arm and the shadows there as well. And that is all from the paint underneath and the glaze on top. Finding even more details, pulling those out. When it came to painting the faces, it really did require more of a wet blending and a stippling technique, because the highlights didn't get quite as defined because of the brims of all the hats. So I just resorted back to some of my older techniques, which I really like on faces. I feel like there's so much gradation that I like to pull out. I use quite a few colors to create these techniques, so I don't mind painting these the traditional way. But for the uniforms, boy, did that save some time, and really, I thought the results were fantastic. I couldn't film painting the eyes, but I got the mouth in here. Painting the eyes was just, had to be too close to my face to do that. And then I went over everyone with a little bit of a 5 o'clock shadow with some blue oil paint. That was it. After that, I could mount everyone back up. Had to use super glue for the resin figure, and I could use regular thin Tamiya cement for everyone else. And here we go. You can really see the contrast here. This is the old Academy figure from the 80s, and you can just see that the folds and clothing just does not have the crispness of the other, all the other figures. The face is kind of muddy, and there's just not a lot of detail there. These figures came out really well from Tamiya. Just when you compare them to the higher priced resin figure, you just don't get the crispness. A huge improvement from what figures that came in kits used to be. The seam lines and mold lines are far less visible, and the detail in the faces has really come a long way. I would say the faces are really where these kits shine. Some of the detail on the pockets and on the jacket really does get lost, and like I said, cutting into some of that plastic to bring out some of the details helps, but I think it's pretty clear when you see these figures here that this one is just far superior in pretty much every way. So yeah, if you have the money, I think this is a great place to start, and this is really going to help improve your figure painting skills and kind of give you that confidence that you might be lacking when you see other creators or other modelers with beautiful figures and you think, why can't I do that? It might be that they just have better figures. And so I feel like that's pretty conclusive. I think more expensive is better. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.